Good morning. Welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd Grubb here, your host on Revive Reform Radio, doing our live talk program, covering church-related matters on this your Tuesday Rise and Shine. And today I'm looking at a topic from the chords of who is Lord, or who is the Lord, to the Creator God. So welcome again. Thanks for joining me here. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, I thank you, dear Lord, for the blessings of your word and this day. I pray, Lord, that you may be with us, dear Father, as we study these things, and may you bless our minds for Christ's sake. Amen. So I'm looking at this topic here, which is who is, from the chords of who is the Lord to the Creator God. So this is our topic here for this day as we do our live talk program here. And so continue this theme, which I get from Psalm chapter 63 and verse 8, which is, my soul followed hard after thee, thy right hand uphold me. So this is what we're looking at here for this week as our theme for the week. My soul followed hard after thee, and thy right hand upholdeth us. And so this concept here that I'm looking at, I'll deal with Moses today. I'll deal with Moses today, and then after that, I'll continue with some of the examples of those who follow hard after the Lord. And so the concept here, again, in Psalm chapter 63, verse 8, my soul followed hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. So the idea of your follow is the various different translation renders this text in various different way. So when we look at the various different ways that you can render this text, you get like a more three-dimensional picture of what it's saying and what's the importance of it. And so one of the ways that it talks about this idea here of my soul, when it says follow hard after God, is that my soul stay close to God. My soul also cling to God. Cling would be something like when you have a film that you use to cling or to shrink wrap something. So you stay close to God, and you can see that in the story of Jacob. And most actually today, I'm going to look at the story of Moses, because the story of Moses is very fascinating when we talk about someone that clings to God. And my soul follow close behind you, so we keep in step with God. We keep very close behind God. My soul is my soul and my life and my self clings to you. My soul cleave to you. Cleave in the biblical term would be like a wife and a husband that is close together. They're glued together, they adhere together, they join together, they stick together. And so you want to be able to do that with God. So this is what I'm looking at. So our focal point here is now with Moses. So Moses here is viewed as somebody that cling to God. So I'll go through my main text, and then I'll deal with Moses in a few minutes. So in Psalm chapter 63, verse 1 through 11, Psalm 63, verse 1 through 11. This is a Psalm of David, a person that definitely clings to God, our background character. So in Psalm chapter 63, verse 1 through 11, it's a Psalm of David. When he was in the wilderness of Judah, O God, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee, and my soul thirsted for thee. My flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land, where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. So this is part of what we not only believe in the power of God, but we believe that we've seen the righteousness of God. We've seen what God has done, not only in the past, but what God can do and will do in the future. And so we believe this. And as we believe this, we long for this and we live for this. And this is especially, you can see true in the life of Moses. Moses, as a young person, believed in the power of God. He believed that God was going to work a deliverance for his people. And Moses walked by faith in those beliefs. And because of that, he experienced what I call here from the chords of who is the Lord to the chord, to the Creator God. And it's going to be important why my topic is like that. because you're going to see the transition. And this is important for you and I because we're in that type of environment. Our environment that we exist in is an environment that is similar to Egypt and could be also said similar to the time of Noah, similar to the time of Sodom. And yet, God says in the last days, you will show forth his power in his people through righteousness in an environment that's supposed to not be conducive to righteousness. And so that's why Moses went from the courts of who is the Lord to the Creator God is the answer. So it is this concept that we live in, this very anything goes environment, but yet from that God will have righteous people that walk in his light of his countenance. So this is where we're at, and this is what we want to be. So notice here, I'll read again, to see thy power and thy glory. So as I have seen in thy in CD in the sanctuary. So we are seeing God's power and thy glory in his glory. But here, notice David is writing this when he's in trouble. And oftentimes some of the most powerful things that he wrote when he's in trouble. So this is important. So notice here, because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. When I remember thee in upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches, because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul follow hard after thee, thy right hand and upholdeth me. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. And that has been true throughout our lives. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes, but the king shall rejoice in God. Everyone that sweareth by him shall glory, but the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. So that's the story here of David, and that's the story we find of Moses. Now, to get a little bit closer to Moses here, we go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 and 6. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 and 6 tells us simply that now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And in verse 6, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So we can find in the life of Moses and the testimony of Moses, written by Moses, and then later by Paul, as we're going to read it, that Moses was one that followed hard after God. And Moses received a blessing because he followed hard after God. And we want to be able to take his story and be able to understand how we too should follow hard after God so we can receive a blessing. So notice we find here, I start off with the statement by Pharaoh. With the statement by Pharaoh is a statement, probably a fact, but probably it shouldn't have been a statement, it should have been a question. So I guess it's a statement question. So in Exodus chapter 5, verse 2, Exodus chapter 5, verse 2, we begin here. Exodus chapter 5, verse 2 says, and Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? So this is a statement of, my understanding of it is a statement of question and a statement of defiance at the same time. Notice he says here, I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. So when we talk about those who follow hard after the Lord, they would say the opposite. They would actually make a statement, but not in the negative, in the positive. Now ask a question. And they would say they know the Lord, and they would have let the oppressed go free. Oppressors don't know the Lord. It doesn't matter even if they go to church. They don't know the Lord, and they don't know that the Lord's intention is to let the oppressed go free. So in this situation, I find it as an interesting study. Now, this is why it's an interesting study in my mind, an interesting meditation, that we're living in that, what they call like a mirror of the Egyptian situation. And when we live in the mirror of the Egyptian situation, what we're experiencing is that in the last day, instead of there be an exodus, it's what we would call a second coming. God is coming to deliver his people. And in the last day, the Bible lays out in Revelation that there'll be this, what we call the seven last plagues upon those that are persecuting God's people via what the Bible calls or describes as the mark of the beast. And so the environment that we're living in is so typical or so reflective of Egypt. And this defines, we live in an environment where, as I said with Moses, Moses is that person that left from the courts of Pharaoh, being trained in Pharaoh's thinking, but he was also trained by his mom in the Lord or the ways of the Lord. And he left there, and he was supposed to be the deliverer of God's people from Pharaoh. Now he comes back to the courts of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I don't know no God. Moses says in Genesis, the Lord is the creator God. And we are his people, the sheep of his pasture. And I'm asking you to let them go. So in the last days, this becomes the mirror reflective backstory to the second coming of Jesus. And when you look at the story of Jesus, it's the second coming of Jesus with God's people. The difference is God's people don't just leave Egypt. We're told that God's people will leave the planet literally and be exodus out. But the narrative is the same. It's the same scenarios, and I'm going to go through some of the narratives with you in the next few minutes. So you will see that, at least in my mind, I'll explain to you how I see it in my head, that what we're seeing developing is the same developments. And what we see here is the same. It is this concept that there's the most powerful nation on earth. They don't believe that there's a God. They believe that they evolve and there's no such thing as creator. And, all these narratives we see play out it's playing out in the last days. And it's a beautiful setup. We live in an environment where, there's just wild and, the flesh pots and all of that. So I'm going to go through all of that. And you see the narratives, it is so crazy, the setup that we're living in. And so Pharaoh makes a statement, which is the main statement of major media and all the institutions that call themselves universities and stuff. They don't know no God. There's no creator. There's evolution. And they're the superior and they're the best. And that's what Pharaoh's attitude was. But Moses grew up in the courts of Pharaoh. Moses was taught all of that. Moses understood the power of Pharaoh. Moses understood the technological advance nature of the Egyptians. Moses saw the power. Moses saw the astronomers or the astrologers or whatever you call them, the necromancers and all the arts that they have. And okay, there's power there. But Moses believed that there was a more powerful God. And in the environment of all that decadence and that eating of flesh and all that, there comes out Moses, who is righteous and who believes in God. So this becomes our narrative. It's in the last days. What we have is we have like a movie, like a Mad Max movie, a Grand Theft Auto video game. The craziest stuff is going on in our environment. But out of that, God brings out a remnant, people who are living righteous with all this craziness going on. And that's Moses out of the courts. You see, Moses is not the person who is outside in per se. He went out ultimately after 40 to what we call, I think, modern day Ethiopia, somewhere down there. And then he lives in the wilderness. But he grew up for 40 years. So until a grown adult, he lives in the court of all this decadence. So all this excessive meat eating, all this excessive, paganism, all this excessive belief that there's no God, all of this stuff, all this decadence, all these crazy women, the hoes and all that stuff. And he grows up in that. He comes up in it. And then he says, I'm going to serve the Lord. And that to me is the end time narrative for you and I when we talk about following hard. It's not following hard per se in isolation. It's following hard in seeing the drug epidemic. It's seeing all the crazy genetic engineering people that, look like there's something went wrong. And still come up in all of that and still choose to serve the Lord. Right? Now, it doesn't mean that says there's a certain point where you don't pull yourself away from all that madness. because it seemed like it's a horror show going on sometimes. But it is in that environment of just war, 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 and you choose peace. It is not in a monastery or in isolation. It is in seeing it. It's walking on the street and seeing the people, living on the side of the street, but you choose not to go that route. Is fast food restaurants everywhere, flesh pots everywhere. You choose not to go that route. It is the go-go bars and the strip clubs, and you know where they're at, and this all this stuff online. You choose not to look at all the crazy slimy people, and you move in that direction. And so Moses was in that environment. This is Moses' environment. Moses is not in an environment where it is a cloister or somebody just like put the stick in their ears so they can't hear. They see the narrative of the crazy thing, but they choose to walk a certain way. Now, there's things that one has to do because ultimately Moses has to go away and be in the house of a priest, far away from all that decadence. And so, but he's out of it. So he came out because you can't come out of something unless you were in it, right? Come out of her, my people. Well, you can't come out of madness unless you were in the madness. So, as my topic is from the courts, he was in the courts. He saw all of this. So I'm gonna keep going through some text here with you. So he saw all of this and he came out of it. So it's our marching orders also. It is not like we are not familiar with these things. As I say, you see the things where they always have these car chases and the police shooting up people, and you be like, okay, was what I'm watching, was it real or was it a video game? Was it a movie? And then you start realizing, oh no, it's not a movie, it's actually live. You can see some of the craziest stuff going on live, and yet you can choose not to live that way. See, this is the end time narratives for us. It's out of the courts of the madness into a total different mindset, and people in the madness think, oh man, you guys are strange because you guys not partaking of all this foolishness and this Kevorkian nonsense that goes on and all this kind of crazy genetic engineering stuff and stuff like that. They'll be like, no, at least we're trying to avoid it. So that's it. So I'll read it again. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? Moses would have known his mindset. Moses was trained under his mindset with the best. And I know not the Lord. I know not the Lord, he says. Neither will I let Israel go. Makes sense. If you observe oppressors, it takes only God can release the oppressed out of their hands because they're benefiting from the oppression. And that's what it is. So when we see oppression being taken out, we understand that oppressor is not going to let it go. So Moses understood why was what he was saying. But what happened is that so the Lord was going to release the people, but it was going to be through plagues. And so often when we preach a mark of the beast, we normally say, oh, the mark of the beast is going to happen. What we sometimes forget to explain is that the response to the behavior is going to be the plagues. And when you saw what went down in COVID, and you kind of get an idea, that's just a tip of the iceberg. That's, like we're told that there's going to be smaller plagues before the seven last plagues. And you understand that says, when people are wicked and going to try to force people to lose their jobs and force them to take a Dr. Frankenstein shot, God will deal with the wicked people. And so that's the message of the Bible. The Bible doesn't say that, oh no, they're just going to do a mark of the beast, saying they're going to have us running and scared and, cause us to lose our job and embargo us and cancel us. And then they go on and everything is happy and hunky-dory. No, they're going to have blowback from that wickedness, and dead bodies going to pile up from that wickedness. And that's what we see going on now. It's just not going to be, oh, they just cause people to retire early and quit their jobs, and they just go on happily ever after because we're the best and we're the greatest. And like, oh yeah, not so, and not if you understand God. And so in Exodus chapter 20, verse 18 through 21, Exodus 20, verse 18 through 21. So this is most actually Exodus 20, verse 1 through 19 is the giving of the Ten Commandments. And the verbiage of the Ten Commandments is written there in Exodus 20, verse 1 through 19. Through 17, sorry. But verse 18 now is the people now, after they heard the thunder and the lightning, and they were scared, and they hear the words saying you shouldn't steal. It's like the people got scared. And so when we talk about following hard after God, we look at Moses as one of our examples of what we're supposed to do. So notice Moses comes from the court of Pharaoh, who know no God. Moses hear the thunder and the lightning, and Moses push forward. Moses is like, no, I love the Lord. I'm not worried about all that. So notice in Exodus 20, verse 18 through 21. And all the people saw the thunder and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So this is obvious, right? You see thunder and lightning, all that type of stuff. You pull closer to the Lord, right? Other people, they're scared. So it's the same thing. When we see certain things going down, we say, "Oh, I know what's going on." You see, we interpret it different because we understand the Lord, and that's why Moses know the Lord. Pharaoh did not know the Lord. Moses come from the decadent court. Pharaoh came from the court. Pharaoh still believe in it. We don't. Have you ever been in a situation where, because you knew the Lord and you were with the mess, with the people doing the mess, and you were part of the mess, but you know the Lord and you know it's not right, but they are 100% in the mess and they believe it's all good. But you're there, like your head is like, oh man, this is not good. So Moses, no, this is not the right thing to do. So we keep going. So notice here, verse 19. And they said unto Moses, speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. So this is the one of the most important story to me in the Bible when it comes on to where people are afraid of righteousness. I remember I'd worship with this lady, and she said that she can only take probably one sermon or one religious service a day, and really a week. So for her, it's like, oh gosh, I just do midday service. I can't take all of that religious business. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So the people like, no, let you speak with us. We don't want God to speak with us. We might die. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your face, that you sin not. This all of that was just God don't want people to sin. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. So God was in the thick darkness, veiled. And Moses, like, I draw near to God. As my theme is, I cling to God. I follow hard after God. And this is what Moses did. This is what we need to do. So that it doesn't matter now, Moses now here. It doesn't matter if it's thick darkness, if it's a burning bush, if it's Pharaoh's court, if it's in a wilderness, wherever it is, Moses' attitude is he clings to God. Whatever is going on, he knows God is in the midst of that. God is working. Fire, brimstone, lightning and thunder, war, famine, pestilence, straight through the dark ages, right? But yet God was working straight to the dark ages. It said the Bible prophesied in sackcloth and ashes, but the Bible did preach in sackcloth and ashes throughout the dark ages. But one could miss that in the beatdowns, in the terrible uprisings, in the earthquakes and famine and pestilence. You could not see the work of God. Moses saw it. Moses was like, I know what God is doing. Because ultimately it's about sin, and it's about ultimately that we don't sin, but also about God taking care of sinners. So as we move towards the end of time, we will see more plagues, more destruction, because God will readjust and adjust wicked people all the time. And so we see that and we draw to God. We don't get scared. Now again, there's things that will happen that will shock us, but we have to cling to God, believe in God. And sometimes people will ask the question, Lord, when certain things happen, does not shake one's faith in what God is doing. It can trouble you because God will shake mightily in the tempests and the storms of life. God will shake mightily, but we study to understand why, because we understand that God take care of His business, and things happen, and people say, "Why is happening?" And sometimes we don't see all that's going on. Sometimes it's years later. You see a documentary or some document comes out and you say, oh, that was what's going on. and God just started wiping out people. And so that's what it is. So Moses saw Pharaoh up close, learned from Pharaoh, and Moses understand that you still stick with God. So notice in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, you still continue this character profile here of Moses. So Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, and we'll go down to verse 30. Yep, verse 30. So notice it says here, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. So the king's command was brutal. It was to kill all the, kill all the young boys. And this is the process of oppressors, right? Because you really want to have the female mostly. You don't want to have the men, because the men is more likely, harder to control, more likely to rise up. It ended up happening that Moses ended up in Pharaoh's daughter's home in Pharaoh's kingdom. Very interesting. But he was a proper child, it says. I don't know what fully that means, but I know what a proper child is. And Moses ended up in Pharaoh's daughter's home. But you can see this, as I said to you before, I was reading a book, which is the catalog, the documentation written by the largest slave owner in Jamaica. And what was one of the things that was most shocking in the book that I never heard when I was a child or when I was a teenager, that the way they operate the farms, the slave plantation was, he documented it very clearly that they kept the male to female ratio. The female was highest and the male was lowest. So it's very small amount of female, very small amount of male and very high amount of female. So this is always fascinating how the oppressors work, because if you kill the male child, there's less rebellion on the farm. And there's a lot of rebellion, but the rebellion was kept at bay. So that's one of the reasons why. Because I never used to understand how can a few people control like 100 slaves. And I realized, it was primarily female. And in the farm, I used to think the people who were cutting the sugar cane and growing the cassava and stuff like that, they were male. It was primarily female. Most of the slaves that were working these plantations were actually female doing those back-breaking work. So this would explain even the high death rate. They'd be dying higher. So it is not explained properly when I was young, because it would seem more barbaric if they explain it that way. That would seem startling. It would be startling at even at 14, 15, 16 to learn that. But yeah, that's what I ended up learning, that it's the catalog, actually, the registry of the slaves were actually mostly female. So I said, that's how that explains it. So the ratio could be very high. You could have 100, and probably only 5, 6 people controlling them. It's and then if they're brutal, they just chop them up. You could stop a rebellion if it was a female. And we actually, one of our main female heroes in Jamaica is actually one of the main heroes in Jamaica is actually a female. And now that explains to me why, because then rebellion almost would have to rise up even from female. So this process here, when you start studying these things, you start saying, I see why Pharaoh would want to kill the male. It's easier to control the female. And if you look at even certain churches, why a lot of the rebellion, I believe, go on in the church, the corporate church, I believe, is because I think the Adventist church has the highest ratio of female to male. So you can control. It's easier to control and then stop rebellion, and then keep everybody in check. It is a fascinating thing. So, and then they go hard after a guy that is probably act like they have too much testosterone. They just take them down, and then you keep everything in check. So very fascinating how oppressors always work. So notice here, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, which would make him a prince, I think, something like that. And hence he would be a leader in Pharaoh's system. So he would have to run Pharaoh's system. So that's the part of it. If you're not in an oppressive mindset, you don't endorse the system, because if you're in an environment where you're like, well, this is a warmonger type of repressive system going all over the world oppressing people, and you reject that. This people of the system and believe in the system will have a problem with you. And that's one of the things I see. But that's part of righteousness. That's part of being Moses. See, part of being Moses is that when you follow hard after God, you say, listen, I don't need to oppress nobody for my 5 cents in life or my $5 in life. Then you're really rejecting the system. because they say, well, that's how the system works. Well, yeah, I don't have to be that in that mindset. So that's why I believe in the end what righteousness is, where there's people like we do it the Lord's way, and we're in an environment that is supposed to give us the Lord's way. Just think about the contradictory of our environment to show you how potent this is. We're in an environment that is aggressive when it comes on to freedoms, but yet they say freedom. It is this contradictory environment. You know, you say religious environment, but it's we in the country that is the biggest promoter of homosexuality, but they say they're Christian. So it is that contradictory. But it's living in that free environment and saying, well, they can choose what they want to choose, but we're going to choose the way of the Lord because we follow hard after God. And know that you will offend wicked people, but that's just the life that we've chosen and the way that we're going. You know, we're in an environment where it's supposed to be freedom. You know, you can't have illegal search and seizure, but they'll search and seize you stuff. And you know, I was saying this to somebody that if you think about for most of the life from this inception of America to now, for most of the time, black people that was on that mark of the beast. They were always subject. They didn't have a law, and even white women were on that type of mark of the beast environment. They never had the law applied. The Constitution never applied to them. Just think about it. It never. And even today, some areas in America they don't have constitution. All right. But people say, well, it's something in the future. No, it's been the existence of the country. You know, if you were a native Indian or you were black, there was no such thing as a constitution. You were always spied upon, illegal search and seizure. You could be arrested. Your community could be flooded with drugs. You could be. That's the environment. And so somebody come up and they say, I'm not gonna do that to other people. They'll be like, you're not part of us. And that's part of it. So Moses came up and Moses said, nah, I read again, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season, which is what they're doing. So, but remember, every time, throughout the history, none of this wickedness was never paid back by God. You see, this is the other part of the biblical narrative that one has to understand. You could have the country that promotes homosexuality most, and then you have the country that has the biggest outbreak of AIDS, or the starting point of AIDS. You know, they say most of it, I guess, went to Africa. I guess everything always go to Africa. I see, but at least by their documentaries. But you need to this is the results. You have to have an outbreak of AIDS, and then lastly, I think it was some monkeypox, and then so I call it mpox because the idea is if you have a monkeypox, then was somebody having sex with monkey, as I say, sexual relationship with monkey, and then you have an outbreak of monkey. You know, it's like this is the way it's supposed to go. Your freedom always get checked. So what was happening to Pharaoh? Pharaoh was not. I've told you before, and you can go online and look at the documents. They did autopsies on the mummy, and they find that they had all our modern diseases. So they were eating the flesh pots, but they were sick as a dog. But that's the reality. That's why we want to cling to God, because we live a different experience. So all the narrative that we see in Pharaoh's kingdom is our narrative. And if we don't want these plagues that continue role in the society, then we have to go a different direction. We can't do the flesh pot thing, even though it's there all the time. Every corner of every street, you can't find all this fast food stuff. You can't go there. So notice here, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, which today is even astounding. Can you imagine how many thousands of years, 3,000 something years ago, and today even the treasures of Egypt creates a wonder in our society still. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. So he said there's a greater reward for him to have, and I'll go after that. So remember, it is them that were the biggest astrologers. Today we have the biggest astronomy come from us with rocketry and sending stuff up to space, and it's like, wow, impressive. I'm gonna tell you the truth, it's impressive. But all that was just garbage because the people are dying like dogs. It's not as impressive. So notice here, for by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. for he endured seeing him who is invisible. So when you think about this, right? Because remember, our thing is the Bible says, "Come out for my people" in the end. And when you think about it, our message is that the Lord is coming and He's going to take His people home. And we're in an environment where, by the time we get to that, it's just full on repudiation of the Constitution and full on oppression. So this is where we're going. So every time we see oppression, we study it. Now, why do we study it? Because we want to see how it ends up. You see, so when I was young, it would be the South African system backed by Europe and America, which is the Revelation 13 beast. And we see how that ended. And then now we see the Palestinian-Israeli conflict backed by again America and Europe, started by America and Europe and backed by them. And we're watching that how it plays out. All of these process that we see, we study it because we want to see how does it end up? How does this end these fights and who backing what and stuff like that? Because this is real. This is not, some, as I say, spiritual interpretation of the Bible. This is just the real interpretation of what's going to happen. So he forsook Egypt because he believed in him that is invisible. This is how we start Hebrews chapter 11. Now we're still in Hebrews chapter 11. So somebody will say, in a Western environment, we can't see God, so we believe we evolve. Well, you can't see evolution either, right? So they believe they evolve and they say, well, they can't do these things and who's going to stop them? Well, that's the question. Who is God? It's the same narrative. Who is God? And by faith, they passed through the Red Sea, seeing Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptian essayed to do and were drowned. So obviously, you can cross the Red Sea in dry land. So unless God will give you passage, you won't. So this is the act by faith. And then lastly here it says, by faith, the wall of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. So there's many stories that happen in between, but the Lord here via Paul write down the story of the Red Sea, which is fascinating, and the story also of the wall of Jericho, which is fascinating. Jericho now is another story in itself, which is today I think is still in modern day. I think it's in the West Bank here, modern day Israel. And this is when the Canaanites live. And the Canaanites represent another group of crazes, as you would say, that live the most terrible life. If you read the description of the Canaanites by Moses, the 7 tribes that are primarily called the Canaanites, so the Hivites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, and so forth. If you read the story of them, Jericho was one of those areas and one of the biggest cities. They're living, you could almost describe where they're living and you say, oh, that's modern day whatever country, especially in the West. It is homosexuality, bestiality, flesh pots, just brutal, that type of stuff. And in the midst of that, the Lord is saying that I have a people, and I will raise up a people in the last days, that in all of that decadence of food, they're going to eat a plant-based diet. In all that decadence of excess, they're going to have self-control. In all that violence and like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, they're going to look after those that are strangers and widows and fatherless. You see, that's righteousness. Righteousness is not joining with the secular society and be aggressive against foreigners and aggressive against strangers. Righteousness is for you to follow the Lord in spite of where you live in Sodom, you live in Egypt, you live in Babylon, you live in Greece, you live in Rome. That's righteousness. And that's the righteousness of what Moses experienced. Moses was like, listen, as my topic is, I'm living in the courts of this man that is saying, who is the Lord? And I come to the answer, Genesis chapter 1. The Lord is the creator God. That's righteousness. It's not an issue. You go to college and you listen to the professor telling you that he's superior and that he evolved and that he's the number one person on the planet and that he's the end product of evolution. Yeah, okay. Been there, done that. But the end result is like, I believe there's a God that created the heavens and the earth, and he's gonna whip your buttocks, and that's it. And you might whip my buttocks, but he gonna whip yours. I might not be powerful enough to deal with you, but God is powerful enough to deal with you. You just deal with it. It's just, and then you look at the evidence, you say, so you're superior? How are you superior? In what way? Like intellectually, physically? Like prove it to me. All right, and that's it. So Moses So by faith, the wall of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. Not possible without the Lord. And that's our behavior. Our understanding is that when you look at the juggernaut and when they move, you're like, wow, that's powerful. You just acknowledge it. You know, it's like when you saw that they were coming down with a hammer in COVID-19. And then, as I say, as it found out, I was watching to see how I would play because I just believe these are just like smaller tests of what's coming. And then you saw how I think first the Johnson and Johnson unravel, and then people start taking it, and they were saying it was supposed to stop you from getting the virus, and then people still getting the virus. Then they say, well, hit them with more, and they keep hitting them with more, 2 shots, 3 shots, whatever. I'm like, let's see how this Kevorkian nonsense, genetical engineer thing gonna work, and then let's see the result of putting that spike protein in people's body. Genetical engineer. See how you watch it and you see how, because you understand that there's power there. It's not that there's no power. Pharaoh had power. But let's see how this power is going to work and how it's going to end up. And that's kind of how you have to watch it. Because there's 2 narratives in the Bible. And we believe in God's narrative, but we have to see how they play out their narrative. But we understand there's power, and there's power behind them, because really who is behind them is the Lord of this earth, not the Lord of the heavens. In Exodus chapter 16, verse 1, 2, and 3. Exodus 16, verse 1, 2, and 3. And it says, and they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the seventh of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. So I've thought about this text, and I don't know if you've ever meditated too much on this text, but this text is fascinating to meditate on, because the question is, people that were enslaved, how did they worship the Lord truly in the beauty of holiness? How did they follow hard? Because remember, Moses himself was from the courts of Pharaoh. He was brought up a free man. And then he lived 40 years in the court of Pharaoh, and then he did a detox for 40 years. 40 years in with us priests. Not just 40 years with a regular person in Ethiopia, but 40 years with the Midian, as a down there with the black people, them, right? But he lives 40 years with the Midianites, with Jethro, right? And for 40 years he down there. So he get a 40-year detox. So he comes back, I would assume, because he grew up in Pharaoh's house, he's the head. Then he lives with the Midianites. He's a free man in his thinking. I don't know so much about Aaron and Miriam. You can see she ran into real problems later on and became white with leprosy. Because she had a problem with Moses and his dark-skinned wife. But here you have this story here with what's his face now, with these children, these people that came out of slavery. They were used to the flesh pots, which is one of the way you control slaves, if you ever do a study on this. And you keep, because we all get hungry, we need food, and you control them now. With this, now they're free, and now they need to live free, and they need to live by principles that, if you just think about today, right? You look at where they have health food stores and any stores that have to do with organic or anything like that, and it's normally a richer community. People who are oppressed normally have a hard time with this, because the ignorance is getting the best of them, and being oppressed, being in an environment where the schools are oppressed. This is one of the shocking things when I didn't understand. For years, I was in America and didn't understand how they kept the black people, black Americans, oppressed, because they control the police, the educational system, the teachers, every aspect of their life. I was fascinated. I thought I was learning about apartheid, South Africa. This is one of the most amazing. So when you see people come up in that environment where their teachers are part of the ruling class, the police is part of the everybody's part of the ruling class, they don't act right. And they don't act right because they were trained not to. This is fascinating. And when you don't come up in an environment, at first it seems shocking, like what's the behavior like? And then you sort of realize, and it takes you back to the story. This story to me is emblematic of that, and it's really a mirror of that. they really didn't understand how to live free and didn't understand greater concepts. And so it ended up happening that all of them had to die. That's one of the sad stories in this. Out of everybody, it was really two semi younger people. And this is why, if you look at the church is almost all gray haired and almost just emptied of young people. It's almost like you have to just like flush that out and then get some younger people, because it's difficult, it seems, for like an older generation to take on some of these concepts. And especially when people come out of like the ghetto or the trailer parks and stuff, and they come out from the real oppression, the mindset of being like progressive and avant-garde seems very difficult, and they rile up against it, and I think it's fanatical and crazy, but you look in the society, it's the ruling class that it's easy to drop a Whole Foods or a health food store, and they'll buy, and they just do it freely. But you don't see that those things thrive much. Probably things have been changing. I haven't been to certain areas in the last few years, but things probably changing. But it's difficult to preach certain messages to people who are oppressed. People grew up in a certain educational system where, as I say, the ruling class is what control their education, because that's why they control it, right? So that they can keep them down. So the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, would to God that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Because remember, that's what they live for. Pharaoh basically controlled them with a whip and with some food, with a stick and a carrot. I don't know if I'm using that right. And you can see it's the same thing. The flesh pots. You can find where you get the greatest obesity, and stuff like that. So people are trained in the oppressive mentality. And when they see you talking about getting a plant-based diet and all that, they'll be like, what? What are you talking about? They're crazy. And you can see also this idea here that in verse 4, verse 4, I don't have it on my board here, but verse 4, you can see that after that, the Lord gave them manna to feed them. But even that was a plant-based diet. It was actually a wheat-free diet. So it's a gluten-free diet and a plant-based diet, no meat. It was just basically some, I don't know what you call that. It's like a coriander seed, they describe it. It's a very stark, a very stripped-down diet. So imagine now, for the next generation, for 40 years, God was going to train them with a stripped-down diet. Their diet going to be very simple, very difficult. If you're used to eating a lot of variety of stuff, and you're told to eat very simple, probably one or two, 3 or 4, no more things in your meal, very difficult. And then they talk about they had the seasonings. They wouldn't be able to have all that seasoning. So the Lord put them on a 40-day fast. 40-year fast, right? And then strip them out of that flesh pot thing. They still rebel, and they end up dying. They couldn't survive. And this is why it's difficult. When you deal with a generation of people used to oppression, it's difficult to preach certain things because they're afraid of the master, and they're only controlled by the master. And you can go in the book Early Writings, and Joy talks about this, that the people came out of slavery. They were just so used to the master's whip that they didn't understand how to be independent and work independently on their own. And that's why I realize, like if somebody see me and they say I'm independent, I think part of it, is because I'm not brought up into a certain system where I used to the master's whip. So I just think independent. I think, I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. I can get up and do the Lord's will without have to have a system over me and the master telling me what to do and all that. So again, from the courts of the Lord, who is the Lord, to the Lord is the creator God. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 13 through 18, I think. Exodus chapter 32, verse 13. And notice it says here, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servant, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and saidest unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give it unto your seed, and ye shall inherit it forever. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the two tables of the testimony were in his hand. And the table were written on both sides, and on the one side and on the other were they written. And the table were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And Joshua heard the noise of the people. So this is the rebellion, as you're familiar with, and it's the giving of the law. And this is one of the sad stories in the Bible where this tripped Moses up. But this now is the people now. Moses has gone. Moses gone to worship and got caught up into worship. Worship went on to a long, very long. And Moses is there with the people, and the people. Moses is gone from the people. Joshua is ministering to Moses, trying to get him in a mindset to be able to meet God. Very fascinating that preparation, that to be in the presence of God, that had to go on. So anyhow, the tables were written, and when Joshua heard the noise of the people, as they shouted, and he said unto Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." So Joshua, fighter, Caleb, fighter, they're fighters, and they hearing all this noise, but he didn't grow up in the courts of Pharaoh. See, Moses grew up in the courts of Pharaoh in the partying. So Moses now says, and he said, "It is not the voice of them that shout for the mastery." That means there's not war going on. Neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. So Joshua hear the party. There's a party over here. There's a party over there. And Joshua hear the party, and Joshua say, they're fighting. There must be a war going on in the camp. And Moses says, no, I'm familiar with this. I used to be in Pharaoh's court. That's party, day partying. So what we have here is the environment that we live in. You live in a certain environment, and you be like, okay. So Moses is familiar with all the lifestyle of the Egyptians. So we have the Egyptians, the oppressors. The Egyptians, they partying, they eating flesh pots, they're doing all kind of decadence, all kind of witchcraft, everything like that. Moses comes up in that environment, in the king's court. So when we talk about Moses in the king's court, Moses is not in the court in the sense of he's there as a waiter. He is the chief partier, so to speak. He's the chief oppressor. He's supposed to be the one that takes over. And Moses rejects that. And Moses said, I don't want that. And that's really what you don't find in the church. It's not so much that there's secularism going on in any country. It is that often you find the people in the church are acting like the people in the world. But the Bible tells us in the last days that God will have, whether it be from Caesar's house, as in the time of Paul, or in Pharaoh's house, or in the land of Canaan, like Rahab, which is the next story from Hebrews 11 that we had read earlier. You will have people, even a harlot, that will say, listen, I know I'm going to serve the Lord. I believe in the works of the Lord. That's really what you want. It's not that, like people talk all kind of madness about the country they live in, whatever country. Listen, we live in a world where every country we live in is just craziness going on. Lawlessness abound. The problem per se is not that there's lawlessness abound. The problem is that you're often not finding people who are saying they're going to be like Moses or be like Lot. Lot lived in Sodom. That's a testimony that somebody could live in Sodom and be righteous. Lot wasn't one of the Sodomites. Often is that you have people in the church that are Sodomites. That's the problem. And so we can be in the courts and know even the party, know the flesh pot, at the flesh pot, and decide that's not for me. It's not that there is people that is being oppressed or live in the ghetto, live in a trailer park. It's that they continue that mindset. That's the problem. That's all. It is, we can be Christians, grew up in an environment that hate the strangers, hate the fatherless, hate the widow, hate everybody, hate. And we find the Lord and we say we're no longer part of that. And recognize that this is what we were. and we live in that environment, and we come out of that because you got to come out spiritually before you can come out physically of a thing. But one has to recognize where you're at. See, Moses knew where he was. And so when Moses hear the party, Moses is like, yeah, I know what that is. That's party. And I've been to those parties. And they were lit. But we don't believe in that anymore. And that's all. The struggle in the church is not so much that there's wickedness out there. It's supposed to be. Like when John preached, John like says, if you're police, let's just give an example, or a soldier, you're not supposed to be taking bribes. That's all. It's not that said police don't do wickedness. It's that you're not supposed to if you're a Christian. And that's really what the struggle is. And this is what God says in the end. He will have people who they can be in Babylon or Sodom or Canaan or whatever, and they serve the Lord. And that's all. But first one have to recognize where you at, where you live. And you partake it. And that's it. And you serve the Lord and you don't partake. The children of Israel were partaking and they wanted to go back to the flesh pots. We ate and we said we don't want to go back. We enjoy some kale and some rice and some tofu and some whatever, some coconuts and mangoes and stuff. That's all. You can survive off manna. You can go, as I say, you can go with a seed grain diet, gluten free, and all that. There's no restriction. If you have self control, anything is possible. You just have to exercise it and put your will on God's side. You can know the party, been to the party, enjoy the party, and decide that that's the party is not for you. And somebody who at the party, still in the mindset, they can be happy with that. That's the difference between Moses and for us. Why try to bless something and call it harnal when it is not blessed? Why call a pig clean? Kosher pig. I mean, it's just a pig can't be kosher. It is what it is. But there's people just can't admit the fact that says we live in a Mad Max environment. We live in a Grand Theft Auto environment, and you can on your screen almost not probably every day, but you can see car chase and people getting shot up and people fighting in stores, and there's homosexual pastors and there's female pastors, and it's just confusion. But that's just admit that's the environment we live in. We live in Sodom and we live in Egypt, and this is where we live. And they have a choice to live what they want to live, and you have a choice to do what you have to do. We live in an environment where people oppress others, where the warmongers, we live amongst them. That's just it. And you just admit that and just move on. They have their choice and you have your choice. You're going to serve the Lord and they going to serve whatever Baal they're going to serve, and that's it. But the Lord tells us in the last days, I say, that we will have people that live in all that decadence, all that craziness, and walk away from the flesh pot, walk away from the party, to serve the Lord, to follow hard after God. Or you can be in the courts of wickedness, like Abimelech, I think his name is, or whatever his name is, and you're in Ahab's house and you're still serving the Lord. That's, to me, is the story of the Bible. That you can be in the worst environment, the worst place, in Greece, in whatever, where there's orgies going on and there's people sleeping with dogs and cats and all kind of stuff like that, probably the big cats. And you can serve the Lord. And that's what our message is supposed to be, and that's what we're supposed to live. You don't have to be 500 pounds. You can have self-control. The Lord has prophesied it again, for your best interest. In Luke chapter 11, verse 9 and 10, the Lord says to us simply that we should, and he said, and I say unto you, which is Christ talking, ask, and it shall be given unto you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be open unto you. For everyone that asketh, receive it. And he that seeketh, find it. And to him that knocketh, it shall be open. If you're looking for righteousness, if you're seeking for righteousness, if you're knocking and asking for righteousness, you will gain righteousness. You can overcome anything. It is any sin, any besetting sin, any besetting weakness, any sin that's in the culture, all the hate and all the warmongering and all that type of prostitutes and pedophile and all this craziness, all the stealing and all the lying. You can overcome all that. You can be a person that loves truth. It is all in you, just seeking, asking, and finding. And you can be like Moses. So I pray that God may bless you towards this end. Let us pray. Our Father who art in heaven, I thank you for the blessing of your words and the blessings of this day. I pray that you may be with us, dear Lord, that we might serve you with gladness and always come before your presence with thanksgiving. May you be with us as we go through this day. We pray for Christ's sake. Amen. Well, thanks for being with me here on Revive Reform Radio. Looking forward to talking to you again live tomorrow, where we should talk about natural health. Until then, I pray that you may continue to walk with King, with the King.